All right, well, tonight I want to talk about basic herb gardening. We're going to talk about how and when to grow your herbs. And then I'll go through some herbs alphabetically to show you all the different options you could have that will work well here in our area. And then I'll talk about how to use them and preserve them so that you can use them year round. So first I want to talk about growing herbs. There's a lot of different ways you can grow your herbs so that you can find something that will work for just about any situation. As long as you have the basic requirements of plenty of sunshine, a well-draining soil, and water, then you can pretty much grow herbs just about anywhere. If you have an area that's got maybe a little bit more shade, then there are some herbs in the mint family that will tolerate it. But for the most part, they do want sunshine. And a large portion of the herbs that we grow and like to use in our cooking are the Mediterranean herbs, and they actually prefer a drier environment. So they're even okay with a little drier conditions, not as much water as, maybe say your flowers and shrubs that you've got going on. I always say grow them where you'll use them. So if you have a vegetable garden and you want to tuck herbs in and around with your vegetables, that's a good way to go. If you have an area in a sunny location that you would like to do a separate herb garden that would utilize all of the herbs that you like to grow, you can do that. Someone like me who doesn't have an area like that, I tend to grow all of my herbs in containers right there on my patio and driveway area. The other option is flower beds, and there are some herbs that will do well in flower beds, but they're going to be herbs that might need a little bit more water, like your basil. If it's an herb that's got a woody stem like lavender or sage or rosemary, you want to plant those in an area in your flower beds that's going to stay a little drier. So definitely not somewhere where you have a drip system or a automatic watering system, because they'll get too much water. It will cause their crowns to rot and they won't do well for you. Here's some examples of growing them in containers. There's all different ways you can do it, using containers that you have around the house or in your shed and garden. The important thing would be to make sure that they have drainage. So you have drainage holes in the bottom. And then the other is, I tell people to not use containers that are smaller than 8 inches. Our wind here, especially in Wichita, it just dries out everything in containers so quickly that if you have too small a container, you'll literally have to water more than once a day. And so then it becomes a lot more of a chore. If you have at least an 8-inch pot and even bigger, then you can probably get away with just watering them once a day during the heat of the summer. This is my herb garden that I have there on my driveway. I have different herbs in different containers, and every year I kind of mix it up and try some new stuff. So it's a fun way to keep them all together because I have this cart. Here's some pictures of how you could set up a separate herb garden in an area. Just remember that you're going to want a sunny location. And if your soil is clay soil, which is a good portion of this area of the state, then you'll want to amend that soil by adding compost and good humus and stuff like that to loosen up and keep the soil from being so hard. When you have a clay soil, then your plants will not have the good drainage. They have a tendency to keep moisture around the crowns, and that's usually what does them in the winter. It's not our cold weather. It's when the crowns stay wet all winter, then that's when you get crown rot and you'll lose your woody herbs. Here's an example of how to have it in your vegetable patch in your raised garden. You can just dedicate one of them and grow nothing but herbs in it. Or if you like to grow the annual herbs like basil and parsley and dill and things like that, you can move those around and plant them in a new place every year if you like. I like the idea of putting them in your flower beds because a lot of the herbs do have pretty flowers, or they have a nice texture to them and they look pretty mixed in. You just want to make sure that they're not going to end up with too much water, and that because that can cause them some problems. Having the drier areas for them actually works out better for your flowers because they would suffer in those areas that herbs don't. The other trick with herbs is really not a trick at all. You just have to remember not to feed them. They don't need any extra food, no plant food for them. So if you're in an area like in a flower bed and you're feeding your other flowers and plants, you'd want to avoid feeding your herbs. When you're growing herbs in containers, it's pretty hard anymore nowadays to get the potting mixes that doesn't have moisture retention or the plant food already built into it. And that's okay. You don't worry about doing that because the watering and stuff that you do in containers is frequent enough that it will flush a lot of that out. You just won't have to ever add any more in. And I tend to, when I grow my herbs, reuse my potting soil from year to year and maybe only add a little extra in. And that keeps the potting soil from getting compacted, but doesn't really add any of that plant food that we're not wanting. Before I start the next section, is there any questions, Tracy?
There haven't been any questions posted yet in the chat.
Oh, well, awesome. Well, let's move forward. Let's pick out some herbs that you guys would maybe want to grow in your gardens. And it may be that there are herbs that you're already growing. If you have any that you're specifically wondering about, I may cover them. And if I don't, you can always ask about them. So one of the first that I always mention is the anise hyssop. It's a member of the mint family. It's an easy one to grow. They come back from seed each year. You can use the leaves in teas, or you can let them bloom. The bees love this plant. They're all over it. So if you're tending to the pollinators, it's a good one for that. But if you want to have the seeds to use, like a poppy seed, they have these seeds. You can pick your flowers just after they've started to turn to seed. And then if you'll bundle them and then put them in upside down in a paper bag and let them continue to dry, the seeds will drop out and you can collect those. They're really tiny seeds, similar to poppy seed, except that they have a licorice flavor to them. So they're great to use in baked goods. They would be great to throw into a salad dressing. You can add the flowers or leaves to your salads. It's a great one to use, and it's a fun one to have, and it wouldn't mind being in your flower borders. So basils are a very popular herb. Usually when you ask anybody what their favorite herb is, they'll usually pick basil or lavender. With basils, you've got your sweet Genovese basils. I have a green one here on the screen for you, but they have red varieties that have the same or similar flavor that you can have if you'd like to have a little color for it. If you like your basil to maybe be a little spicier, like they use in Asian or Vietnamese type cooking, the Thai basils are very popular for that. They usually grow a pretty good size, and they are a lot spicier in flavor. They have lemon basils that will add a little bit of a citrus to whatever it is you're making. They're good to mix in with the sweet basils. And then there's also a cinnamon basil, which, although a sweeter version of basil, and they use it a lot in desserts and whipped creams and stuff like that, it's not technically cinnamon flavored. It gets its name because the stems of the basil are a brownish red color. So they are a cinnamon color, and that's how that gets its name. Calendula is a lovely one to grow. Again, this would be a good one if you have flower borders or if you want to grow it in containers for color. It's they call it pot marigold, but it's also sometimes referred to as poor man's saffron. What you use with this plant is the flowers, the petals. You can pluck the petals when it's in full bloom. If you're going to use it in breads or on cupcakes, or use it to decorate cakes with and stuff, I always trim off the little white tips on it because that can sometimes have a bitter flavor. Otherwise, the flowers themselves, you can dry whole to be used later in face creams, and they use them to infuse for butters and things like that they use for skincare. Calendula is a great one for that. The petals themselves will dry lovely, and you can save and use them for other dishes also. Chives are a popular one to grow. There's two basic kinds. Your pink onion chives have the pretty pink flowers, and you can eat the little flower balls. The little florets in them will break apart. You can put those on top of salads, or you can add them on top of soups. They have that nice mild onion flavor. They don't spread or get out of hand, so they're a clump that you can grow, and it'll stay where it's at and come back for you every year. Garlic chives are the ones with the white blooms, and they will seed themselves all over the place, so you need to watch with them. If you're growing the garlic chives, they have that great mild garlic flavor without having to use the garlic cloves. The flowers, when they start to bloom, they can also be picked and then used on salads and put them on soups. You can mix them in with butters, but you don't want to let them go to seed because they will seed all over your yard and you'll have garlic chives everywhere. So the important part to remember with that is you want to eat your flowers or cut them off on your garlic chives. Cilantro, that's always one that either you love it or you hate it. The great part about cilantro is it's really easy to grow, but it does prefer cooler weather. So you can plant it in the spring and grow it in the spring, and then it will want to bolt and go to seed in the summer. If you save the seeds, then you can use some of them to plant a new crop for the fall and save the other part of the seeds to use as coriander, because the seeds of cilantro are what they call coriander for us. You can buy coriander seed. It's got a different flavor to it, and it's used in cooking frequently. Most people don't realize they go together from the same plant. There are new varieties that they're putting out now that'll say that they are slow to bolt or they're heat tolerant. And if you can use those varieties, because they will last longer into our summer. And that way you'll have plenty of cilantro to cut and use and until it goes ahead and goes to seed. This is for the dill and fennel. They're both a popular herb. The fennel has the anise flavor, again, that licorice flavor, but it's used a lot in egg dishes and with fish. The dill is, of course, the one that we think of with pickles, but it's also great to use in egg dishes, or you can use it in dips. If you like to chop up the leaves to use in those kind of foods, I would suggest the fern leaf dill. If you're making the pickles, then the traditional dill that has the big flower heads on it would be better. The dill is an annual plant, so it will come up for you from seed and it will reseed itself and grow just about anywhere for you. And then once it goes to seed, the plant itself will die out and disappear. Fennel for us, it comes in both a green and a bronze color, and that's a perennial, and it will continue to come back for you every year. Both of these are a host plant for the black swallowtail butterfly. I've given you a picture of what the caterpillar looks like. If you like these herbs, but you'd like to share them, I say just plant some extras And that way you can always move your caterpillars over onto their plants and keep your plants for your own use. French tarragon is another one of the anise flavor herbs. There's, about 3 of them, and they have all different kinds of purposes. I think that French tarragon works great in the lemon desserts. It is great if you chop it up and add it in with a lemon cake. It really does do a nice set with the sugary flavor, the sweetness. The trick with French tarragon is to make sure that you've purchased French tarragon. You will not buy seeds for this. It is only propagated from cuttings. So if you find that you've got tarragon seeds, you're not going to have French tarragon. It's probably going to be either Russian or German. It'll look the same. It'll even be a bigger plant, but it will have absolutely no flavor or aroma to it. So the French tarragon will come labeled as such when you buy a plant, and it will come back for you every year. It dies down to the ground, but then comes back forth in the spring. Horseradish is really easy to grow, but it is one of those plants that will spread. You grow it all year long, and then in the winter time or very early spring, that's when you can dig up the roots to do the harvesting for it. But if you miss any little bitty root on it, it will send up a new plant. So if you're not careful, you could end up with a bigger patch than you started out with. But the trick with horseradish is when you're processing it, you want to process it outside or inside, because it is quite potent when you're putting it in the blender and getting it all blended up. But by adding vinegar to it, you can keep it in a jar in your refrigerator and use it in all kinds of recipes. It's not just for roast beef. I find that a lot of people love lavender. Lavender is a difficult plant for us to grow here, although we can, but you just have to give it some special consideration. They like plenty of sun and they like the dry soil. If you're going to put them in the ground, I would suggest a raised bed for them, or at least a bed that you can mound so that the crowns sit up a little higher. You want to make sure that the area that you've picked has got very well draining soil. So if you live in an area where it's sandy soil instead of the clay soil, you're probably ahead of the game. If not, you're going to want to amend that soil to make that so it's free draining. Lavender is very picky about having its crown get wet. If you have it in a separate area, it's much easier to then mulch it with gravel, as we do like to mulch things here because it does keep the weeds down. But if you use leaves or grass clippings and stuff like that, they can create mold up around the crown. So you'll want to have them pulled back. That's why sometimes it's easier to use the gravel. But once you put gravel on a bed, then you're kind of stuck with it. So that's just something you maybe want to have them in a separate area. There are some annual varieties that you can grow in containers, and they will just work for you for that summer. And then grow them in a container. They won't last for you from year to year. But if you don't have an area you can set aside for lavender, it's a great way to still have it in your garden. Here's a list of the annuals and the perennial varieties that will work here in Kansas. The Goodwin Creek lavender is an excellent one for containers. That's been kind of bred that way. And it's also one that will overwinter indoors very nicely. If you have it inside and it gets enough light from south or west facing windows, it will sometimes put itself into bloom in January and February as an early bloom cycle, and then bloom again for you in the summer. Lemon balm is one of the lemon herbs. It is a perennial version, and it is a member of the mint family. It does get little blooms on it, but the blooms are underneath the leaves along the stem, and they're little tiny flowers. They're very hard to notice, but they will set seed and spread all over your garden area if you don't trim it back. So it's a really good excuse to keep your lemon balm trimmed back You can use it in salads. You can use it in teas. It's a great one to use fresh, and it has a very strong lemon aroma and flavor when you use it. I think it's a great one to use in sun teas. Every month when the Herb Society meets, we actually have a version of this where we use lemon balm to make the tea. It doesn't have any caffeine, so it's a great one for the flavor, but it's not going to keep you up at night. If you like your teas to, your herb teas to have a little bit of caffeine kick to them, you're going to want to add in at least 1 or 2 tea bags just to give that extra tea flavor to your sun tea. I tell people that when you're making sun teas, you pick a bouquet, just a little bouquet of your herbs, and you can do a mixture of them, or you can try just single ones and put them in your jar and add your water and set it out in the sun to brew. It'll take it a couple hours in the hot sun, and it will get kind of a yellow greenish color to it. And that's about as dark as it'll get. And then you can take it inside, you take out your plant material, and you can discard that on a compost pile or just put it out into mulch into the garden, and then take a sip. Do you like the flavor? If you like that combination, yay, great. But if you don't, then just use it to water a plant and start over. There's no rhyme or reason or wrong way to do sun tea with herbs. It's just finding the combination that you like and giving it a try. Lemon verbena is my favorite of the lemon herbs. It is not a hardy herb for us. It does well both in the ground or in containers, but it is going to only grow for you 1 year. But it dries beautifully. It's easy to use in salads. You can use it in cooking because it's one of the woodier herbs. The dried version works just as well as the fresh in your recipes. So it's an easy way to have it all year round. It also works great to make lemon verbena ice cream. And one of your handouts that they emailed to you does include a recipe using lemon verbena to make a simple syrup for fruit or to make the lemon verbena ice cream. And I recommend both. I'm sure everybody has probably got a mint growing in their yard, if not one, probably more than one. I kind of think mint's the one that a lot of people start with because it's easy. There's all different kinds of varieties of mints. Popular ones like peppermint and spearmint and the chocolate mints are great, but the fruitier ones are not quite as pepperminty, but they still have that mint aroma to them. I myself am growing ginger mint and the orange balsam mint this year. The trick with mints is you want to grow them in a container, even if you want to grow them in the ground, unless you've got something that's got an enclosure to it in the ground, like it's in an area where you've got concrete edging around it or something, because mint will get out of hand. If you put it in a container, then you can bury the container in the ground, and that will usually last a year or 2, maybe 3, depending on the location, and that will cause it to break out through the sides of the pots, and it'll try to get loose. And at that point in time, like here in the demo garden, we just dig it up, dig the pot up, and take the mint out and repot it in a new pot and put it back down into the ground. It does keep it from getting out of hand. But if it does escape into your lawn, it really smells good when you mow it. Other than that, it grows great in containers, and it will usually come back for you every year, even in the containers. I've got 3 pots of it out on my driveway right now. I tell people that if you have too much mint, then you're not having enough chocolate. So you want to pick, again, a bouquet of your mint and then finely chop it up. And you can add it to your favorite brownie mix. You can add it to chocolate muffins, chocolate cake, chocolate cupcakes, and it makes a wonderful mint flavor in it that never seems to really get that overwhelming at all. So it's kind of like having an Andes mint and cake at the same time. Anybody who likes to do pizza or their Italian cooking probably loves oregano. There's, I'd say 3 varieties that you could grow depending on your favorite. There's a Greek version, there's an Italian version, and then there's a Greek version that's called hot and spicy, if you like your oregano to have a little bit more kick to it. If, on the other hand, you think your oreganos are a little strong, you can always go with sweet marjoram, which is a milder version of the flavor. Parsley is a biennial herb, meaning that you'll start the plant this year and it will grow all this year. It'll go through the winter and overwinter for you. It'll come back up early in the spring and it will last until about the hot weather in June, and then it's going to bolt and go to seed. So it gives you kind of a year and a half with each plant. And then once it bolts and goes to seed, those new seeds will usually come up later that summer and start the process over again. Flat-leafed or Italian parsley usually has the best flavor, but your swallowtail butterflies don't care which variety you plant. They're more than happy to help munch on it. So make sure you plant extra for the butterflies. Rosemary, there's quite a few varieties, at least 3 that you'll find locally that are great to grow in containers. They're not hardy here, so they're not going to winter over. They're going to be ones that you can bring indoors if they're in a container and grow them during the winter and then take them back outside. If you don't have room for that and you want to grow rosemary here as a perennial, ARP and Hardy Hill are the most reliable, but they won't necessarily live forever. Usually there's going to be at least one winter that will come along every 3 to 5 years that will kill them down to the crown, and then you have to start over. But you can get a lot of use out of them, and they can get quite large if you will leave enough room for them. There is a variety that is not as upright. It tends to crawl and kind of hang over the sides. They grow it a lot at Botanica in their sensory garden on the wall, but it will also survive from year to year. Sometimes you can find it in hanging baskets at some of the local nurseries, but it's a nice one. They all have good flavor. It dries very well, and it will come back for you every year. Even if you grow that indoors, they tend to bloom in the spring. They get those beautiful blue blooms on them, and you can just let them bloom until they're done with that, and then the new growth will start in the spring. Sages are a common herb for people to grow. Most people just think of the sage like you use in your Thanksgiving stuffing, but there's also tricolor varieties, there's purple varieties. The golden variegated is another one that are a little different look. They're not necessarily as hardy as the silver variety, but they have the same flavor, and they're a nice change of pace in the look, especially if you're using them a little bit more decoratively. Pineapple sage, which is the one that's in the middle with the red blooms, it is not hardy here, but it is a sage that produces those red blooms in August and September. The hummingbirds love it, and the flowers and the leaves on it have a pineapple fruity aroma to them and a flavor. They're great to add into teas or use in salads. There's 2 different kinds of savories. The winter savory is a perennial, will come back for you each year. It works great in bean dishes or with peas, in stuffing, any of those kind of things. You can even add it to soup. It has a peppery flavor, and so it's a nice way to add that in. If you want to grow an annual variety of it, the summer savory looks pretty much exactly the same, but it's not hardy here. It tends to get used more with the fresh vegetables, like your fresh green beans and your new potatoes, but it has, again, that same peppery flavor. Stevia, for those of you who have wondered about it, may or may not be growing it. The leaves are very sweet. You want to use it in beverages or in drinks like teas or lemonades and things like that. It will add that bit of sweet. But if you get too much of it in there, then it will have a bitter flavor. You can dry the leaves, but you want to pick the leaves before it blooms, because that's when it'll have its strongest flavor. If you have recipes that call for stevia, unless it asks for the stevia leaf specifically, you're going to use the products they have at the store that are more sugar-like. They usually have them in with a binder so that they can be used in recipes in place of sugar in a 1-to-1 basis. You can't just substitute the fresh leaves for sugar in most recipes unless it specifically calls for it. Times, there's all different kinds of times. My favorite time is the lemon thyme, both in the plain and a variegated version. It's a hardy one for us. It's a low grower and it will come back for you each year and increase in size. It's great to just trim it off and have it added into soups, or you can use it on the grill. It's a very versatile herb, and you can find just about any flavor you like. If you just give them a little pinch and smell and see, you can choose from that. Dutch's Greenhouse down on South Seneca usually have 6 or 7 varieties to choose from, so it's easy to compare. So before I start the preserving the harvest, are there any questions that have come up?
We've had several questions that have come up, and I'm going to go ahead and start at the beginning. So give
Okay.
me one moment, please. Robert indicated that he's tried rosemary in ground or containers for years and it always dies. Do you have any advice for Robert on how to get it to survive?
Well, we have had some crazy winters, and so sometimes it's our winters that do us in before anything. If his ground is been prepared so that it has got a good drainage to it, it could be just the weather and you don't have much control over that. If you're growing it in containers, then you would want to take the containers inside. I have killed rosemary in the winter in containers by not watering it enough. You don't want to water it too much, but if you don't water it enough, the whole plant will just turn crispy. So it can be a little picky even in the containers. If you're growing it in containers outside, even if it's hardy, it might not last because our winters, sometimes when we drop below 0, that's just too much for it. But if you're growing it in the ground and it is a hardy variety, then make sure that you've amended your soil enough that they've got a really good drainage.
Okay, so the next question is, I'd like to ask about preserving weed-like medicinal herbs like shepherd's purse or dandelion root. Is it best to hang dry?
Well, I'm not actually covering anything that has to do with medicinal herbs, and I don't know that one specifically, so I'm not sure. If it is one that can be dried, then there are different ways to dry herbs, and I will cover that in my preserving. But as to whether it's specific to that herb, I'm not sure. You would probably need to Google that and look around. There are some members of the Herb Society that are very interested in the medicinal aspect of herbs, and they would be happy to discuss that with you if you ever came to a meeting or were wanting to join and come visit with us. But I don't have an answer for you tonight.
Okay, thank you. Can trimming cilantro regularly delay or prevent bolting?
It will to some extent, although eventually it's just gonna move faster to try to send up that flower stalk. But yes, the more you trim it back, the longer it will last. And usually when the first of the little flower stalks start to shoot up, I'll trim those back too, try to hold it off. But eventually it's like you're just trying to thwart what it wants to do, and it'll just double down on its effort. But that will buy you some extra time. And with the new heat tolerant varieties, you can sometimes get all the way into July and still be harvesting before it goes ahead and sets seed.
Okay. Where do you purchase your herbs?
I buy most of my herbs here in town at the nurseries like Stutzman's and Caw Valley and Dutch's and Johnson's. Sometimes you can find decent herbs at the box stores, but unless you're standing there when they unload the truck, they have a tendency to not get them watered very well, and they tend to look pretty raggedy after a very short time. And they also don't usually have a lot of variety. So if you want more variety or want to try new things, I would try the local nurseries. I think you'll have better luck.
Okay. And my herb garden gets plenty of sun. What herbs can take Kansas heat?
Any of your Mediterranean herbs will, and that would be like your sage, your rosemary, your lavenders, your thymes. All of those do well with the heat. Basil loves our heat, but basil would want a little bit more water. It's a little fleshier. It's not a woody stemmed herb. So it just needs a little bit more water, but it loves our heat and it doesn't mind our wind. It will grow well for you.
Okay, what is a crown?
The crown is, if you look at the plant and you've got your roots are below ground, and then there's the base of the plant that all the stems come up from, that's the crown that's right there at about the ground level. And that's where everything is coming up from. And if that rots, then nothing can grow up. It'll just rot and die back completely.
Okay, won't lavender get too cold in winter if it's raised above ground? Or do you recommend a specific genus that's better?
Any of the lavenders that are perennial here will do fine for you. And when I'm talking about raising it, I'm talking about you just want to raise it just enough. You just kind of mound it up. It doesn't have to be a big raised bed. You're just mounding it up just to make sure that the crown of the plant sits slightly above the grade of the ground. And that will help with your drainage. That'll be what will help the crown stay dry. The cold itself does not bother it. It has to do with, if we have a wet winter, then that's more of a problem than if we have a dry winter. Dry winters are usually not as bad, but if we have one of those wet winters, or when we have frequent snows, or we have plenty of rain, this winter was not that, but last winter was, then that's when the danger of the crown rot comes in, and you want to make sure nothing's up around the base of the plant that could hold moisture and cause that rot to set in.
Okay. Which sage has more healing GI benefits?
Healing what?
Healing benefits.
Again, I was covering culinary tonight. I wasn't covering the medicinal parts.
Absolutely.
And there's different sages, and they use them for different things. So it would have more of a specific property, and it's just not something I can answer off the top of my head.
Okay, so this next one, I apologize if I mispronounce this word. I've tried to grow patchouli with very little success. Any tips on it?
I've never grown patchouli, and the pronunciation was right. I don't know of anybody specifically that does grow patchouli in our area, so I'm not sure what to tell you on that. But I'd be happy to look it up and get back with you if you want to give your information to Tracy. I could reach out and find out and then contact you.
And I should actually be able to get it just from the chat and the registration. So I'll be sure to
Okay.
provide you with that information, Lisa.
Sure. More than happy to help.
Another, thank you. And then another thing, just like several people have said, is that Hillside Feed and Seed has a ton of varieties of herbs.
Oh,
So
yes, and that
that's
is
good
another one.
information.
I'm so sorry, I did leave them off the list. I sometimes forget about all their herbs, and they already have some in their little greenhouse room. They may have even moved them outside onto the benches by now. But I was there a few weeks ago, and they had quite a few already going. And I know Dutch's herbs are out for sale already also. They had it on Facebook today.
Okay, so the next one is, will cilantro grow in container inside in the summer?
No, it's not really going to do very well for you inside. It likes the heat. It likes all the sun. And most generally, we can't mimic that in the house unless you have a greenhouse or a sunroom. But just in a regular house, that's why I always tell people that if you're going to grow basil, even if you grow it in a container, you want to harvest it frequently during the summer and do the preserving that we're going to talk about, so that you can have fresh basil flavor all year round. But you shouldn't try to bring it in and salvage it over the winter, because our houses are never warm enough, they're never humid enough, and they're never bright enough light in the house to get them to survive. If you have grow lights and stuff like that, you could maybe prolong it, but they're just never as happy as they are when they're outside. And they love our summers because of the heat and the humidity, stuff that makes us want to wilt in July and August. Basil loves it.
Okay, this next one you may actually be doing in the next portion of your presentation, but it's can you dry all herbs and what's the best way?
I'm going to cover that in the next segment, so we'll get that. And if they have any questions after that, I'm happy to answer those too.
Okay, and then let's see. So just several people asked for, well, I'm going to say Dykes Arboretum has a lot of native plants and herbs. That's one thing that actually someone has shared. And then several people have expressed interest in patchouli. So we'll be sure to share that. And it does say, here's I think a last question so far is, when is it safe to plant herb plants in containers?
Well, I haven't put my herbs out in containers just yet. Now, the mints that I have that wintered over and my French tarragon, they're already coming up, but then they're already used to the weather outside. If you're buying plants from one of the greenhouse places, if it's been inside, then I would wait probably another week or two, depending on how the weather goes. I usually plant out the herbs in the demo garden the last week of April or the first week of May, depending on the weather. Because, sometimes our frost can come later than we think. The only difference would be for that would be basils. You shouldn't plant your basils until later in May. Your nighttime temperatures have to be consistently in the 50s. Basil hates temperatures that are any lower than that, and they will fail to thrive. So you can plant out your herbs, and if you want to go ahead and buy your basils, you're just going to take them in and out every day so that they're inside the house at night, and you can bring them back out when it's warm enough in the day, because our nighttime temperatures right now are still dropping too low.
Okay, and that concludes the questions so far.
Okay, well, let's start on the preserving part, because now that you've figured out what herbs it is you want to grow, you figured out where you're going to grow them in your yard, and they're growing and going gangbusters. Now what do you do with them? So this is what we're going to cover now. It's easy to dry herbs. And there are a lot of herbs that benefit from that much better than others. So things like, if you think of it as any of the woody herbs, or the herbs like mints, they're not really so much woody as it's easy to strip the leaves off of them. Those are all easy to dry, and then you'll want to put them away. You can dry them in the oven, in a low oven. Some people even like to dry them in the microwave, but you have to be very careful because you can cook them too much. The other option you can do is to do a dehydrator if you've got one. You can hang them in the bundles like the picture shows. And I always show that picture because that's the kind of thing that they show in magazines and things like that. And so people think that that looks like a great way to dry them. And it is for a short period of time. Your herbs that you dry like this are going to be dry in a matter of days. And once they are dry enough that they're getting the crispy stage, then you need to take them down and you need to put them away. You put them in jars, you can put them in bags, whatever, and then keep them out of the light. But if you were to leave them hanging up any longer than that, they will start to collect dust. And you really can't clean dust off of them when you want to cook with them. So it's the hanging up of herbs is a short-term process. I myself like to do them on paper plates on my dining room table. It's easy to strip the leaves off. I can mix them around on paper plates. That way I know that they'll dry. On the bottom, there won't be moisture that will collect on like there would be on a glass plate or a hard surface. And then as they dry and they start to shrink down, I can consolidate them. And when they finally reach the stage, usually it takes up to maybe 3 or 4 days. Then I know they're crispy enough, then I'll go ahead and put them away in jars and put them in the cabinet. The trick with herbs is you don't want to store them in a cabinet that's near the stove or over the stove, because that's probably one of the hotter areas of your kitchen. So you want to put them in a cabinet away from light and away from that kind of a heat source. And then your herbs should last for you and at least a year for you to be able to use them. Freezing works much better for other herbs, and those are usually the softer herbs, basil especially. If you dry basil, the volatile oils in the leaves, which is what gives it its flavor and aroma, have a tendency to evaporate at a faster rate than, say, it does on rosemary. So what happens when you dry basil is that it doesn't take very long before it's lost half or more of the flavor oils that are in the leaves. The better way would be to freeze it, and you can freeze them in ice cube trays. You can chop them up and freeze them like that in broth. If you use it in soups, you can do it in oil. You can do it just in water, and then you just thaw as you need it. You can go ahead and make your pestos, and by putting the oil on it, that oil protects the leaves. So in the freezing process, it preserves them in a way that they stay that fresh state. So when you go to thaw those things to use them, it's as if they were fresh from the garden. So say you've frozen your pestos in little containers like what you would use for a recipe, then you would take it out and set it in your fridge, and in a matter of a few hours, it will have thawed, and then it'll be ready to use on your hot pasta or in any other way that you like to use your basil. You can do the same with parsley. You can do the same thing with French tarragon or cilantro. Those are all those soft herbs. And when you're making pesto, you don't have to limit yourself to just basil. If in the process of harvesting your basil, which the more often you harvest your basil, the more branching it does and the more herb that it will make for you. So, you want to harvest them every 4 to 6 inches after it gets its initial growth. And if that's not enough for a recipe, then that's when you can add in some of your other herbs and do a mixture. It'll all work well in your pestos, and it gives it a little different flavor. But some of those are very, very delicious. You can also preserve herbs in food, like you can make your herb vinegars. You can make herbal butters, and then you can freeze them. You can make jellies, either sweet or savory. You can infuse honeys, or you can make syrups. And then depending on your recipes, it can be ones that you can that last with the longer shelf life, or you can do even the refrigerator kind that are the fresher short-term jellies and jams. So when you do your herb butters, you can soften your butter and you add your lemon juice, you add whatever herbs that you want to add all chopped up. And then at that point in time, you can use it or you can freeze it. If you're going to freeze it in the size increment that you will want to use. Do you want to have an herb butter that you can use on your bread? Use it on your veggies? Is it something you just want to dress a steak with? Then keep that in mind in doing your increments. Do you just need a little bit of it in wax paper and frozen? Do you need it to be a little bigger so that you can have enough for a whole meal? And then you can divide it up that way and then put them in bags once they're frozen and label the bags so you know what herbs you've used. And then you can continue to use those throughout the winter. And even in the summer, when you're grilling, it's easy to use it right there on the grill with both the veggies and the meat. If you're doing vinegars, you can do single herbs or you can do any kind of combinations. Usually you're using a white vinegar, white wine vinegars. If you use red wine vinegars, they tend to have more of a flavor of their own. And the herbs sometimes get lost in that. They don't overpower it enough. If you use a more basic vinegar, then the herbs will really shine out in the flavor. And then once you have your herb vinegars made and they've had a chance to infuse there in the bottle, then you can use them in salad dressings. You can use them for marinades. Sometimes you just need a little splash of it in a soup or a stew just to add that brightness of flavor. And that's an easy one to make, and they last almost indefinitely when you're using vinegar. Of course, if you have a jelly recipe that you like to use, go for it. It's usually done in such a way that they can be savory or they can be sweet, depending on what kinds of herbs you're wanting to use. But if you think of savory jellies as having something with a lower sugar to them, then they work great to glaze chicken or pork loins or your turkey. And you can even add them just to grill when you're grilling on the outside. You can just brush them on at the end just to caramelize it onto the meat. I tell people usually to use apple juice because it has a tendency to have a milder flavor and it doesn't overwhelm the herbs. But in other instances, maybe you want to do cranberry juice with sage. That's a wonderful combination. Any of your lemon herbs will work. And you can just then process it the way you normally do. In another one of the handouts you received, it was all about the different recipes to preserve your herbs. And I had jelly recipes in there, honey, how to make vinegars, and the butters. So that way you know kind of what to do and what your ratios will be when you want to make it. But if you do this frequently over the course of the summer and you're harvesting your herbs that way, then you will create more herbs because they will come back stronger after they've been trimmed, and you'll have just that many more things to then use in your recipes. We have Herb Society that meets here in town, usually at Cowtown, but during the summer months, sometimes we also visit gardens and people's homes and stuff to see their herbs. We have a Facebook page that you can visit. We also have a Facebook group. And then the Herb Society of America is the national organization. They've got a wonderful website. They've got a lot of information for the public, or you can join and they have member only information that you can access. There is an International Herb Society, then they're the ones that pick the herb of the year. And the herb of the year for 2023 is ginger. So at the Spring Garden Fair, the first weekend of May here at Extension, we will be showing in our Herb Society booth how to grow and harvest your ginger and then how to use it in recipes. So it'll be a great way to learn all about the herb of the year this year. And now I'm ready for any other questions that you may have.
Okay, so we have had at least one question. Let me get back real quick to where that was. It'll be just 1 minute.
Okie dokie. Hopefully I answered the questions that the people had on preserving. But if I didn't hit exactly what you were wanting to know, I'm happy to expand on it.
Okay, so a question that was added is, have you ever had success growing lavender straight from seed, or is it really better to buy seedlings?
It depends on how much lavender you want to grow. There are people that do start it from seedlings. It's very slow to grow. And you probably want to start more than you think you're going to need because the germination rate on it is pretty slow. But if you're only needing 1 or 2 lavender plants, because, you know, depending on the variety, they can get up to 3 feet wide. So if all you're needing is a few, then probably getting a plant is about the same cost as getting a packet of seeds. So at that point in time, it just kind of depends on how many you need. If you're just needing 1 rosemary plant, then buying a rosemary plant is probably just as cost benefit as trying to start them from seed. But in other instances, if you're wanting to grow lots of basil and you love it, it's an easy one to grow from seed, and then you could grow multiple plants with 1 packet. So kind of depends on what you're wanting in your garden.
Okay, I just had another question that popped up. Give me 1 moment.
Okay.
It is, I know that it isn't a typical culinary use, but I like to make simmer pots on the stove. Would the lemon verbena release a strong mint flavor if used specifically after drying?
Lemon verbena will have a citrus smell, but yes, it would be nice to add into one of your simmer pots. And it would hold that even if you've dried or fresh. The lemon balm one, I would say no. It would dissipate pretty quick and you'd lose the smell.
Okay, so another couple of questions came up.
Okay.
When making herbal vinegar, how long should the herbs stay in the vinegar?
You know, it's kind of an aesthetic question because some people leave them in the duration because it helps them remember what herbs are in it. Other people will let them be in the bottle for 4 to 6 weeks, and then they will decant it to remove the herbs themselves and then rebottle it without them. So it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of another. Either way will work. The difference is when you leave the herbs in the vinegar will leach out all the color. So eventually the herbs just look kind of brownish. Sometimes that doesn't always look so appealing, but it doesn't do any harm because vinegar is a preservative. So the herb material can stay in there the length of time you have the vinegar. If you leave the herb in there, you can continue to add herbs or add vinegar to the bottle as you use it to get a little bit longer use out of it.
Okay. Can you start rosemary or lavender from cuttings?
You can. They would be the woody cuttings that you would take. And yes, that would probably be easier than by seed. That's usually how they do them in the greenhouses, is they're doing the cuttings and rooting those out.
Okay. Other than overwatering, what are the most common ways beginners kill their herbs and how can they be avoided?
Overwatering would be the big one. Another one is if they're growing them in containers, they have them in too small of a pot. If you have an 8-inch pot, then I'd say you can grow 1 herb in it. The bigger the pot, the more plants you can have. So if you have a big enough pot, you could probably have 3 or 4 plants in it. The bigger the pot, the easier it will be to keep it watered right. if you're growing them into the ground, probably watering maybe, but they're actually, it's easier in the ground. They don't dry out as fast. I would say it would be taking too good a care of them. Herbs really kind of thrive on neglect. They don't need a lot of fussing over. And so if you fuss over things too much, which would be giving them food or mulching them in such a way that it inhibits their growth, I'd say that would probably be one of the other things that would be difficult. But herbs themselves are one of the easier ones to grow because they don't need to be fussed over. They're a great one for beginners because it's kind of hard to kill them.
Okay. Also, what are the signs of overwatering?
Well, it depends on the plant. If you've got them in a container that drains and they don't sit in water, it's pretty impossible to overwater them. Even during the summer when it gets really hot in July and August, my containers outside, I water them every day because the soil will dry out that fast. But they're going to drain out. They're not going to sit in water. So as long as they're not sitting in water, like say you have a container that has a drainage hole, but you have it in a saucer, and so the water drains in the saucer and it sits, then you're still going to have a problem with them getting root rot. So you would want to not collect water in a saucer underneath them. If you do, then you want to dump it out within a short amount of time afterwards, just so they don't sit in it. Other than that, during the hot months, container herbs can get watered every day and not suffer because they're going to dry out from the sun anyway. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay, what's the easiest way to collect the cilantro seeds to get coriander?
Well, once they send up the flower stalk, you're going to wait until it finishes blooming, and then it's going to form the seeds. And then you want those seeds to ripen. So the seeds are going to start to turn the brown color. And then once that little flower stalk starts to turn brown and the seeds are on it, then you could cut that off and then put it in like a brown paper bag and just let them finish drying. That way they won't, you can't put them in a plastic bag because until they dry out completely, there's still moisture in them. It could cause them to mold. So I always suggest putting them in like brown paper bags and then just letting them finish drying. And then you'll be able to knock the seeds off of the plant pretty easy.
I usually test the soil in my pots to see if they need water. Should I wait until it feels dry before I water my herbs?
For herbs, I'd say I would do the test where you stick your finger into the first knuckle. And if you don't touch anything moist, then they probably could do with the water. And it depends on how hot it is outside. With our hot summers and our windy summers, things outside dry out faster than they do, like say if you've got them indoors as a house plant type thing in the winter. You kind of have to vary on that. But if you want to test, I do the finger in the soil, see how it feels.
What are your thoughts on hydroponics for growing herbs?
I have a couple ladies in Herb Society that have one of those arrow gardens, and they're actually growing them in their kitchen, which is hydroponically, and they seem to have great success with it. And I know that in some areas like the Well Garden Industries, he was growing certain herbs, especially basil, hydroponically, and they to sell to the chefs and stuff here in town because they could do a lot of herbs in a smaller space, and they were very successful with it. We also have in the demo garden one of those towers where they have the different layers, and then they can plant it full of plants all the way up. It's almost my height, so it's almost 5 feet tall, and they grow nothing but herbs in it all summer, and they do great. So there are other options to grow if you're limited on space, or you want to try out something like a tower garden or hydroponically, those are usually working.
Okay, and I think that that was actually the last question we had in the chat. I just want to thank you, Lisa, for your incredibly informative presentation. There's been a lot of comments in the chat to that same effect. So everyone has really appreciated all of the valuable information that you shared. I do want to let everyone who has participated in this program, I have posted a link to a survey in the chat. Hopefully I typed it correctly. If not, there is actually a link in the email that I sent out with the Zoom information. We would, again, really appreciate it if you would offer your commentary, because we want to make sure that we are offering the types of programs that you appreciate. If you're interested in any upcoming library programs, please visit wichitalibrary.org/events for a complete calendar. The next virtual one will be next Thursday at 6 o'clock. I believe it's on tomatoes. I believe it is on tomatoes. Hopefully I'm not wrong. We just want to thank you again for your support of the Wichita Public Library. And just again, thank you so much, Lisa. Your presentation was wonderful. It really was.
Thank you. I really enjoy doing it. And if anybody has questions that they think up after, if you want to get those questions to me, I'm more than happy to answer them. If anybody would be interested in coming to the Herb Society meetings, if they can get an email address to me, I can add them to my newsletter list. I'd be happy to send that out. Our next meeting will be April 18th. It's on a Tuesday, and it will be at Cowtown this month.
Okay. And if you need to, you can actually email me at the Wichita Public Library at tpartridge@wichita.gov, and I'll be glad to forward your information to Lisa so that you she can contact you about those meetings, etc.
Not a
And
problem.
then say that again, Lisa.
I said not a problem with that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Also, if you go through our Facebook page, you can leave a message there, and I'm the one that answers it, so they can contact me that way also.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. So that concludes this evening's program, and just thank you all for participating, but especially Lisa, thank you for your presentation. It was great.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.